it is preparedness. Whether I'm talking from the angle of what could happen, talking about potential EMP or a collapse of the food system, or just doing a show on practical advice on the fundamentals of prepping, whether it's food storage or water, protection, medicine, etc. But it's something I think is really important. And as we are now looking forward to what is to unfold in 2024, we're seeing a lot of indicators that make me concerned. We're seeing reports of these elites like Zuckerberg, for instance, building these massive compounds. It seems to be that it's not just him, there's a collective discussion about how more and more people are preparing. We even have a recent notification that was put out by Google talking about these sensitive events that they predict to be happening in the coming month or so. So there's a lot of just different indicators that show that something could be happening. Not to mention, it's an election year, and I think there's going to be all kinds of craziness related to that. And so, joining us today is a returning guest, Jonathan Hollerman, who is a prolific. He's an author. He's involved with a lot of different commissions and projects on helping people understand why we need to be prepared. But he also runs a company called Grid Down Consulting, and part of what he does with that is consult the elites. I mean, it's kind of odd, but he's, as you'll see in the interview, that he's got a handful of clients that are in the Forbes top 100 list, where he's building out bunkers, 10, 15 million dollar plus massive bunkers on 10,000 acre swatches of land. And so the information that he's got is really particularly interesting because this is a guy that's actually consulting these people and understanding what their worries are, what they're preparing for. So this is going to be a really good and interesting interview that I think is very timely. And one thing I'll just say is that this isn't meant to be some sort of doomsday, it's all going to be really bad interview. It's looking at the worst case scenario. And that's again, that is the foundation of what Mr. Hollerman focuses on, is preparing for the what he thinks is one of the worst case scenarios, which is an EMP or some sort of grid down event. And if you prepare for that, you're kind of prepared for everything else. So hopefully this is a very informal interview for you. It's also a good one to share with your friends or family. Say your husband is kind of on the fence, and he's not really into the prepping stuff you're looking at. This is a good interview to show because there's a lot of helpful information in it and some practical solutions. So folks, please enjoy the interview. Jonathan, it is great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Seth. Glad to be here.
So, for people that aren't familiar with you, I've had a couple interviews with you so far, and actually, you're probably one of my top one or two favorite authors. And we'll dive into your book series a little bit later in the show. But you are someone that specializes in preparedness. EMP, what happens if disaster strikes. And how about I'll let you just give a real brief introduction into what you do, like with Grid Down Consulting and your books, and also working on your task force, just to help frame our discussion that, obviously you're someone that people might call a prepper, but you're not just some random guy that knows how to, kill a deer. You are actually an expert in this field.
Yeah, sure. So my background is I'm formerly a military SEER instructor. That stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Probably about 15 years ago, the threat of a grid down event kind of came on my radar, and I did just tons of research. And I'm an analytical type guy, so I just started latching on to any kind of piece of information from the 2004 EMP Commission reports and any government reports, and I realized it is not a sci-fi conspiracy theory. This is documented. This is something that's likely to happen in our future, either from EMP, solar flares, cyber attack, or a physical attack against the grid. So I started writing books on the subject, which did really well. And then about 5 years ago, I was invited. One of the members of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, which is a joint services wargaming operation looking at the grid down threats for the military and the government as a whole. I was invited to attend that, and that was a huge eye-opening event to be part of, and that led to I've been to a bunch of the FBI's InfraGard meetings. I was asked to be on the board of directors of Impact America, and then I was a member of Secure the Grid Coalition and a bunch of these organizations and attending these meetings. And then 2 years ago, I was asked to be the deputy director at the U.S. Task Force on National Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board on EMP to Congress. So I split my time between that, writing books, and for the last 12 years, I have a company called Grid Down Consulting, where I work with individuals to help them prepare for what may come, whatever events their family believes are on the horizon, help them build a plan of action. And over the last 10 years, that business has grown. I've done over 500, worked with over 500 high net worth clients. And in the last couple of years, there's so many people that are starting to do this. I'm a one man show, so essentially, the last couple of years I've only really worked with super high net worth people, and it's kind of increasing. Just in the last 2 years, I've got 4 or 5 guys, families, I should say, on the Forbes 100 list that I've been working with. So that's uh, I enjoy that because they don't have a budget. When they ask you what to do, you tell them you need to do this or you need to buy that, and they buy 5 of them. Where previously I worked with like doctors and lawyers, and you have a budget and you have to stay within that budget. So it's been very fulfilling, I should say, to do what I've been doing. So
It's interesting 'cause I'd say that a large chunk of my overall knowledge about preparedness comes from the books that you've written and then, our conversations, and so you do great work and you have a great knowledge. And now that we're in 2024 and there's these very strange things happening, like I'm not sure if you saw Leave the World Behind, the recent
mhm,
Netflix, that mysteriously was produced by, or strangely produced by Barack and Michelle Obama, which is
right,
interesting,
right.
and what they get into with that. But is also, I'm going to play a little video snippet here because so Paul Joseph Watson, if people are not familiar with him, he's a great great YouTube channel and influencer. He has he did a video on this recently, and he did a compilation of them talking about what's happening with all of these elites building bunkers. So I'm going to play this quickly and then kind of look at a recent announcement from Google talking about a sensitive event they predict to be happening pretty soon. Then we can dive into some of your work somewhere. So let me go ahead and play this video for folks first.
Well, mine's a little dark. I just feel a lot of concern that 2024 may be the year of a black swan event. This is a national security event with high impact that's very hard to predict.
Powerful people in the world, they see themselves as utterly incapable of actually creating a future in which everything's going to be okay.
A colossal compound on the island of Kauai, complete with a massive doomsday bunker. What is it with billionaires and their doomsday bunkers?
But I mean, the question is, what do they know that we don't know?
They're prepping for some kind of large-scale disaster.
I'm a bit worried about it, to be honest.
Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, has started to prepare for the doomsday.
Is there something that Mark Zuckerberg seems to know that we don't?
How many have seen The Last of Us in the zombie apocalypse?
So we've got this, that's just a small compilation of some various things. But then one other thing I'll pull up is that this announcement went out from Google recently that's strange to say the least, where they sent this out to advertisers and they say that Dear Advertiser says in February 2024, Google will update the inappropriate content policy to clarify the definition of sensitive events. And so what they say in there is examples of sensitive events include events with significant social, cultural, or political impact, such as civil emergencies, natural disasters, public health emergencies, terrorism and related activities, conflict, or mass acts of violence, which could be a civil war, right? Mass acts of violence. So you have Google talking about this sensitive event as they're talking about it. You have the news came out about Zuckerberg, a lot of the other elites that are building these. And so these bunkers to survive whatever it is. So I wanted to just kind of hit this conversation with 2 angles. One is what could happen in 2024? What might these people know? You mentioned working with some people on the Forbes 100 list. I think these folks a lot of times get news quicker than the average Joe does. Maybe they've got someone that works in defense contracting that gives them a tip. So I want to see like what you're seeing on the ground, and then also what is happening in terms of the structures that people are building. So I'll go ahead and just hand it over to you and see what your thoughts are.
Sure. So I saw that clip here a while back where she was mentioning the 2024 a Black Swan event. I have no special knowledge of any event coming down the pike. I do run in circles where we get information, I would say maybe a little bit sooner than the average Joe on threats to the country. A perfect example of this is the president of Taiwan. I mean, the media is not really even covering the fact that an independence leaning, a separatist leaning president was just elected in Taiwan this weekend, and China is not happy about this. And a day and a half, 2 days later, we've already sent a delegation from America over to meet him and shake hands with him, to the ire of China, who's already starting threats. So we have this scenario where China may be pushing for independence, Taiwan may be pushing for independence, and China has always said they will not allow that. That is a red line for them, and they will take over Taiwan. They will use the military to prevent that from happening. And so we're kind of in this really dangerous area of whether or not we're going to respond and assist Taiwan. If we let China just go in there and take over Taiwan, all of our large semiconductor facilities are in Taiwan, where we get the top semiconductors for all of our cars, for military technology, for your toaster oven. So we're in this situation where can we allow China to take over those facilities and take over that country? Because it would be years and years. I mean, technology in America would take a big hit, because it would be years before we could replace those facilities. So I'm just talking about one event. But what we've been watching here for the past year, I mean, starting with Russia going into Ukraine, is and our response to that, kicking them out of SWIFT and the Nord Stream pipeline, and how we responded. And there's a lot of cyber attacks that are happening behind the scenes that a lot of people are unaware of, that are happening back and forth. People are unaware that China and Russia and most of our enemy nations have thoroughly infiltrated our utility grids and our pipelines, and have the ability at a whim to shut these things down or destroy them. So these are all threats that that you can document. These aren't, like she mentioned, a black swan event, but that's some nefarious thing that could or couldn't happen. There's no specifications. There's no documentation. I'm the type of guy that's going to latch on to things that I can prove, that I can document and say, hey, this is a legitimate reality you need to be concerned about. And there's so many of those that are out there. And we're watching our response to Russia, and our response to, I mean, we just launched attacks on the Houthis, right? And, who are backed by Iran, who have the ability to attack us in this manner, as far as taking down our grid with an EMP. So we have all these, we're kind of watching the Allied and Axis powers being formed, like in the late 30s. We're kind of watching these countries coming together, and we're watching Iran and Saudi Arabia and China. We're pushing Russia into the arms of China, and all these people are working against the American control. I don't want to use the word control, but America has been the leader of the free world for a long time. And our country, we're watching the social fabric of our country fall apart. There is no truth. There is no reality. There's up is down, down is up. It's just the fabric of our society, mainly because of the media. They're pushing us in separate directions and dividing us by race and religion and all these different political factions. So to answer your question is a lot of the people that have the high net worth ability to do something about this, right? I'm not convinced that it's like they have some secret guy on the National Security Council or something that's feeding them information. They're just reading the same signs that we are, but they actually have the financial ability to create a safe haven for their family. And so from Grid Down Consulting and what I do professionally, we kind of sell this as an insurance policy, right? People have medical insurance and dental insurance and home insurance and car insurance and fire insurance and flood insurance. They have insurance on the electronics. And if you don't have these different insurances in your life, the people look at you and say, you're irresponsible. Aren't you preparing for a rainy day? How do you know you're not going to get cancer? How do you know your house isn't going to burn down? So the high net worth people are just seeing what's coming in the future. And they're saying, yeah, I'm going to build a tucked away location on a couple thousand acres in this rural area or on this island. And when whatever it may come, whether it's another pandemic with a 40% death rate, whether it's a grid down scenario in this country, or whatever the case may be, a civil war, they've got a place to kind of ride out the storm.
And so with the folks that you're working with and some of these people, and I know that secrecy is probably really important with this, but you can humor us a little bit. What would you say is one of the most impressive projects you're working on? And you can give whatever details you want to, or make a few little bits about it up if you need to protect security.
Yeah, obviously I don't discuss my individual clients, and I don't discuss specific locations, but I've got multiple clients that are working on between 2 and 4,000 acres, very large budgets. I'm talking the neighborhood $20 to $40 million budgets. And you've got a client with a private island in the Bahamas. So there are clients that have the ability to kind of pull out all the stops, and they say, they fly me out and they have me go through their property, and I design a structure that fits with their aesthetics, that also has high security features. One of the differences between me and some of there's only a handful of guys that kind of do what I do, not to the level or to the amount that I've done it, but they specialize more in building fortresses, razor wire and alligator moats and things of this nature. The problem is anytime you do that, you just can't hide it. Everybody knows exactly what you're doing. And you mentioned in the news recently, there's some high net worth guys that have been kind of revealed for the plans and the things that they're building and they're working on. And I do things differently. I believe in hiding in plain sight, and I believe in so when I design a facility, we will build the facility with 3 different sets of plans that one the contractor see, one the building inspector sees, and one the homeowner sees. And none of the secret aspects of this property are on any of the plans other than the one the homeowner sees. And once that location is finished being built, we lock the gate, and it's large property, so it's not like you can just wander back on there. We lock the front gate, and we bring in one of my contractors from out of state. Again, that's important because a lot of people that do this, they use local contractors, and local contractors talk at the local bar about the crazy things they're doing up on the hill for that rich guy they're working for, right? So we'll bring an out-of-state contractor to cut in the tunnel networks, put in the bunkers, and all the high security features of the location. But if you were a FedEx guy driving onto the property to deliver a package, nothing's going to be out of sort. Nothing's going to look like anything different than a large property or something along that lines. Like I said, there's no alligator moats, there's no razor wire or berms or steel shutters or things of that nature. That doesn't mean there's not a ton of security features on that property. So kind of my philosophy is live to fight another day, right? Because a lot of these guys, these super high net worth guys, they'll have a security team of 3 or 4 or 5 guys. But that also gets interesting because these 3 or 4 or 5 guys have families, right? They're not going to leave their families behind. So now you're bringing in 3 or 4 or 5 other families. And if you try and run that location with an iron fist, or if you try and do anything nefarious, those 3 or 4 or 5 guys, those tier 1 guys, they're going to put you in a ditch somewhere, and they and their families are going to live there, right? So it's a balancing act. There's a lot of things that go into what I do. There's a lot of boxes that need to be checked. There's a lot of things that we have to look at. Extraction plans for high net worth guys. One of the big failings for a lot of these guys, these ones that are available in the press, because they get building permits and they're doing projects that are so large, they just can't hide them from the building inspectors. And so they have to file building plans, which are open to FOIA requests, right? That people are able to get access to. And when that big project makes it to the media, you can guarantee a month, 2 months into a long-term event, when people are starving to death, you're going to have an entire town's worth of people coming to that location. Your 4 or 5 security guys, yeah, they may win the first handful of battles, but soon enough, at some point, they're going to be overwhelmed. There's no place that's 100% defensible. So these are things that it's far better for me to get involved in the process with these high net worth guys before they start building, because when I come in to analyze existing, like I got a client with 10,000 acres in Wyoming, and I mean, he built this structure. It's got bulletproof window. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff that I know people are talking about in the nearby city, right? I just, there's no way people are talking about the things that are happening on this property. When I come in there, it's kind of like your cover's already blown, right? So I mean, things I do with other high net worth guys is, when you buy 2 or 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 acres somewhere, people are curious who's buying this 10, $15 million property. So a lot of people want to talk. And my philosophy is, a lot of times we'll build a website for that property with a fake business, and, you feed the people something to talk about that they can grasp. That way there's not rumors flying around, because then the rumors kind of take on wings. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and it's a lot. I really prefer getting in at the early part of the process. The problem we're running into now is we've got all these scenarios that could happen in the near term, and it takes years to kind of build out some of these locations. So we're kind of running on fumes here. We're kind of running on borrowed time.
Hey folks, I've got a quick message for you. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, myself included, talking about the importance of buying precious metals, gold and silver. But what's really behind that? Is just a thing of, hey, buy this gold, buy this silver, right? Or is there something deeper that we should be looking at? So I recently came across some figures about house prices. So in 1930, the average family home was approximately $4,000. Fast forward to 2023, the average family home is just over $400,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because things have just gotten more expensive? No, it's actually because the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1930, right? When people talk about the collapse of the dollar or inflation, this is what it means. Now, let's take a look at gold. So in 1930, if you wanted to purchase your home in gold, it would take approximately 200 gold coins. So 200 gold coins would purchase the average family home in 1930, about $4,000. Now, if you, instead of buying a home with that gold or cash, you set those aside. If you set aside $4,000 in cash in 1930, it would be worth $4,000 today. What can you buy with $4,000? Can you buy a family home? No, you can't even buy a crappy used car. But if you set aside $4,000 worth of gold coins in 1930, which is 200 gold coins, 1 ounce coins, that would be worth approximately $400,000 today. And this is the key lesson about precious metals. It's not about getting rich. It's about putting your money into an asset that protects you against inflation and against the destruction of the currency, which is what happens to all fiat currencies, especially now we're in the end days of the dollar. And so that's why it's important, maybe not all of your money, but a portion of your money, a portion of what you have, I highly recommend putting it into precious metals of gold and silver, because what it's doing is it's protecting you. This is an asset that has stood the test of time, not just stood the test of time since the 1930s. We're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. Gold was used to buy houses back in ancient Rome. It's still around. It's an asset that will forever have its value. So folks, if you want to do this and you need someone that you can trust, there's no person I can recommend more than Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a strong Christian patriot, and he's out to really help people to protect their savings and what you've worked for against the destruction of the dollar, not to mention also protecting it against the dangers of central bank digital currencies. So to learn more about this, go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 720-605-3900. Both those places will allow you to set up a quick appointment where you can talk to a wealth advisor that will help get you started on this path. Again, goldwithseth.com, 720-605-3900. And with the clients that you're seeing now and looking at the overall trend, even this whole Leave the World Behind film, which it's funny because I think it's a great film to show a friend that like thinks you're just a doomsday prepper. That's maybe some liberal that's saying, yeah, you're too wacky, and we don't need guns and whatever. They're kind of buying into, and maybe they're living in a blue city right in the middle of it. That film does a great job of saying, look, like it really presents that scenario, like I think very accurately of what could happen, and it makes you want to be Kevin Bacon. Like it makes you want to be the guy that's prepared, the guy that has antibiotics, knows how to treat radiation poisoning. That probably has all those things, and so, but it just seems like this is becoming much more of the collective consciousness now. And so on your end, you've been doing this for quite some time. What are you seeing change? Are you seeing more and more people being aware of this? Are you seeing an uptick in book sales, an uptick in people reaching out to you? Obviously, you're trying to grow your business, so you're doing things to have growth, but are you seeing that there's actually a trend of more people thinking, you know, I need to really think about my safety if something goes wrong?
100%. I mean, I would just say in the last year, there's probably just 50% growth. And it's not one specific thing that you can hang your hat on and say, it's this reason why everybody's really pushing into this. But to be honest, back when Obama first became president, a lot of people really freaked out, and there was a huge climb in long-term food sales and things like that. So it is cyclical, right? So I don't want to say that this is the time. I'm not a prophet. I don't have some special knowledge that isn't out there, but there is real concern about the future of our country. And again, looking at China and Taiwan, I strongly believe that if we get closer to November and it looks like Trump's going to win, I firmly believe that China will go after Taiwan with the current administration in office than they will if Trump gets in there, right? There's just they'd rather face off against who's in office now than who's not. But to kind of go back to your question on that movie, there were some pros and cons to the movie. I mean, I saw it. Obviously, it's Hollywood's take. It's Barack Obama and his wife's take on the end of civilization type event, and they did pull out some tricks and talked about how an enemy may attack this country and the disinformation and shutting down the communications networks. There was a bunch of glaring, just regular errors in the sense of like, I think at one point, didn't the power facility catch on fire or something, but they had electricity throughout the whole thing, because that would be the first thing an enemy takes out. You would be electricity, because every aspect of human life today revolves around electricity. That would be the very first thing. It's in every enemy nation's war doctrine. That first strike doctrine is taking out the electric grids, which it showed, but everybody seemed to have power. I think Kevin Bacon's initial speech when they pull up on his property, I think it's fantastic. I think it's absolutely true, and that's how people would absolutely respond in that scenario. So this idea, well, my buddy Bob at work is a prepper, I'm going to go to his house. That's not going to go well for you if you're planning on doing that. If you're not taking it serious and you think you're just going to go to another location. But that brings up a whole nother aspect of this. A real person that was serious about what they're doing knows the first rule of preparedness is you don't talk about it. The fact that Kevin Bacon, everybody in town knows that he's a prepper, right? And showing up at his house, that's bad for him, right? So he would not have been talking about it. It would not have been obvious. And then the silly thing was, he tells them about this bunker that he helped build. He ain't telling them about that bunker. He's going to go there and get that stuff for himself and his own family, right? He's not like, hey, there's a whole bunch of free food and underground bunker down the road here. He wouldn't have told them about that, right? But then with any Hollywood movie on this subject, they always throw in weird stuff. Like, what the heck is up with the deer? Right? Running around staring at people. You know what I mean? So
or the flamingos,
it's like they're
pool.
Yeah, they're projecting. And I've heard a lot of people comment about this, they're prepping us for what's coming or this or that. They're projecting to a degree, but at the same time, they always do something weird, right? So I don't know. So I think a better thing to show people would be like American Blackout. That's probably a 10-year-old kind of docudrama that I think it was Discovery Channel, maybe it was History Channel, one of them put out, which was on a long-term or was on a grid down event and how fast society will fall apart.
Oh, so it's called
and it's kind of
American Blackout?
American Blackout. I think you can watch it on YouTube at this point because it's pretty old. And they do a really good job about showing how fast society falls apart when you lose the electric grid and how fast people get and desperate. Now, obviously, it's a mainstream production company. So the prepper character in that docudrama, well, he's rocking a flat top. He's wearing BDU pants, right? I mean, it's just, yeah, it's just kind of, so they paint the prepper as usual as like some crazy guy. But the end of the show, so they do a really good job. But at the very end of the show, what you see is like this standoff happening with this prepper guy, and I'm giving really, I guess I am giving a little bit of spoiler here, but and there's this big standoff, and then all of a sudden the lights come back on. Nobody explains how or why, but the lights just come back on, and then everybody just kind of walks away, and life goes back to normal. The same thing with the movie Contagion, if you remember years ago. I think it was Matt Damon was in that. Society falls apart. He's watching his neighbor get killed over some food or this or that, people breaking in and things of that nature. And then all of a sudden, the government announced, so people are starting to starve to death and riot, and they're looting and going crazy. And the government comes out on the news and says, we got a vaccine. It's going to be 6 months. You still have to feed people for 6 months. You still have to keep everything from falling apart for 6 months. And then everybody starts dancing and they're having problems. And, everybody goes back to driving to Starbucks for their morning coffee. That's just not how it's going to be. When society falls apart to that level, it's just you're not just going to kick it, back on.
Exactly. Well, it's funny because even with these stereotypes of preppers, it's like they say they're these bearded guys in flannels. And like, I don't know, looking at you and I'm not sure where that stereotype even comes from, but
we're both guilty as charged, I guess.
Exactly. So I always like to, have a good part of these types of discussions be just practical knowledge and know-how. And one thing I will say, so I'll pull up your website, and I'll put the link in the description, but I highly recommend people check out this website, Grid Down Consulting. There's a few things on here. So if you go up to the books button on top, these are your books. I'll give my quick kind of thoughts, and then I'll let you jump in as well. But this book right here, Survival Theory, Preparedness Guide. This was the first book that I found, which was, it really is a preparedness guide. Extremely, extremely practical. It's not some high level thing where it's like only if you can build $1 million bunker are you okay. Like the fundamental principles are just exceptional. It should be people's reading once a year. But then you also have your EMP Equipping Modern Patriots series, which I thoroughly enjoyed this. And this actually, I think I learned more from this series, which is now, what is it, 4 or is it 5-part series now?
It's 3-part, and there's a companion novel that I co-authored, that one right there alone, with a female author. So it's a different character from my series, and it's written from a female's point of view. So it kind of paints a picture what would happen to from a female perspective in that environment.
Okay. And so these are books that are just really, really entertaining. They're gripping, and you learn so much. And then you've got Survival Theory too. So if someone's just starting and they want to get the initial download of information from you, what would you recommend?
So yeah, there's a couple books I recommend. Obviously, my book Survival Theory, I would start there, in Survival Theory 2. So Survival Theory 2 is kind of I would say the culmination of my life's work, because the first 30 or 40% of that book includes a report that I wrote on the psychology and physiology of starvation and human desperation in a prolonged grid down event. And I wrote that report for the U.S. military, the May Wargaming Institute for Officer Training, and to kind of explain to the military of what they can expect when society kind of falls apart, and how their soldiers and their emergency personnel are going to react. So that report that you're pulling up there now, so obviously in Survival Theory 2, it's just the text of the document, and most of the document, not all of it. I want to wake American people up. And so just like Survival Theory 1, Survival Theory 2, because I'm only one guy and I only have time to work with so many clients, that was kind of my way of paying back the average Joe, the blue collar worker that, like you said, can't afford a $2 or $5 million survival retreat location to fall back to. So there's a lot of information in there for somebody that's on a budget to kind of prepare. And so this report that you have up there on the screen now, Grid Down Death of a Nation, that I'm giving that away for free in PDF. So I want that to be shared with as many people as possible, because there is a big glaring hole in the preparedness community. And that is a vast misunderstanding. It's normalcy bias of how people are going to act and react in the aftermath of a long-term event. And so, I mean, there's probably 30 pages on historical data and the Holodomor, the Chinese famine, the Bengal famine. So that, if I could pick one thing, if someone would say, hey, what's one thing? If it was one thing, I would say get that report. It's 122 pages. It's not going to offer any advice for you, but you have to understand what you're preparing for in order to prepare. So you have to understand the mindset of other people that are going to be around you or even part of your group in this environment. And you have to understand how people are going to react when they start going hungry. Because most of the preparedness quote unquote experts on YouTube, they grew up in the richest country in the world. They don't understand the psychology and the physiology of what starvation does to a person or to a community or to a town. So that's so critical to understand beforehand. And you can download that on free on my website. And I'll plug a couple other books. Incredibly important books to buy would be Selko Begovic, The Dark Secrets of SHTF Survival. This is a guy that survived somewhat of a grid down event in modern society during the Bosnia conflict. His town was surrounded. For a year, they had the electricity cut off. They prevented food and supplies from entering that town. And his firsthand accounts of how fast that town fell apart, and neighbor killing neighbor over scraps of food, warlords taking over street by street. Yeah, that's a book there. That book is incredibly important for people to read. If you're looking for fiction aside from my books, the book 1 Second After, which is a very common book on this subject, is a big wake-up call. That's a New York Times bestselling author that wrote that book. So those would be some books I remember. You know what? I'll throw in two more. Philip Zimbardo, the Lucifer Effect. He's a world-renowned psychology. It's basically how good people turn evil, and he explains how the average Joe can go from being a regular farm boy and then go to Vietnam and commit horrible atrocities, and then come home and talks about how SS troops, in some of these camps were able to murder and kill tons and tons of people. And then you find them 10 years later and they're working a 9 to 5. They're a family man with 5 kids and they're living normally. So this idea that mankind is generally good and peaceable and we're all going to hold hands, sing kumbaya, and just ride out whatever storm may come, because that's what the American people have always done. That's just not true. All these events that have happened, from Katrina to Hurricane Sandy, there's always other areas of the country that came to their aid, and there's always an electric grid outside of those areas, at least, to bring in food and supplies, and the ingenuity and the resolve of the American people to race to the aid of other Americans in need. Some of these scenarios, you're not going to have that ability. You're going to be on your own. The American government, the United States military, is 99% reliant on the civilian electric grid. They've warned Congress 20 years ago that if they lose the civilian electric grid, the United States military will be completely unable to respond. They've got 48 hours of backup diesel. They've got 3 days of food on the average base. They rely on interstate trucking and the electric grid just like everybody else. So these movies in Hollywood where there's always the military running around or bringing in box trucks full of food, never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. So having some I guess my point is the most important thing, Seth, for the American people to do is gain knowledge about what the after effects of a long-term event or some big catastrophic event, serious pandemic, what that looks like. Because people's idea today is all based on Hollywood and The Walking Dead and like the movie you just discussed, where people were just like, oh, hey, how's it going? Hey, you're a prepper. Let me have some food. It's not going to be that way. And people need to realize before they start planning, before they start running out and buying food plans and things like this, they need to have a better plan of action and think through their kind of preparedness plan of action before they start buying stuff.
It's such a good point. And before I respond to that, I just want to show people on your website, griddownconsulting.com, and I'll put these links in the description. Under the research button up there, you hover over it. On the very bottom down, it says Grid Down Report. And that's how you get to this page right here. And then you click on that and it opens up the PDF. So that's free for everybody. Great place to start. And something I want to just share with you in terms of what you just said about the mindset. Folks, I have a quick message for you. Look, the 2024 election is do or die for the globalists and communists that have infiltrated our country and are currently running it. And they either have to win or they're going to destroy America so nothing is left either way. And if you're the person that's watching this show and following this information, unfortunately, you have the weight on your shoulders of making sure that your family is prepared, especially as we head into this next year and this next election cycle, because unfortunately, I think it's going to get rough. And one of the ways I know they're going to target us is through our food supply. You can see all the food factories burned down. You can see the warnings of coming famines and food shortages and everything like that. And food is one of the number one ways totalitarian regimes have always used to control the populations, destroy the food supply. So if you don't have at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of stored food, I highly recommend you take that very seriously because, look, as I mentioned, if you're the person that's watching this, you're the person that carries the burden of making sure your family is prepared. I would recommend at least 6 months, if not a year, of storable food. So if things go haywire, whether it's grid down or terrorist attack from what's coming across the border, that your family can safely stay in place and you can feed your family. So folks, today, go to heavensharvest.com and make sure you get your storable food that'll last for up to 25 years. Just in case things go south, you know that you have what's going to take to feed your family, which is so, so critical for us to get through this next stage of history. So go to heavensharvest.com today, order your food that'll last up to 25 years, and use promo code Seth to save 15% on your entire order. Again, that's heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth, S-E-T-H, to save 15% on your entire order. I would definitely consider myself a prepper. I've done a lot of preparations. People who watch the show know that I'm a prepper. Now, I'm not someone that has a, 5,000 acre off grid location and all that. I'm a middle class prepper, right? So I'm doing what I can within my means. But I was thinking about that, one day. It's like, why am I like that? Like, why am I someone that is thinking, okay, how many years worth of food do I have? How much ammo do I have? Do I have antibiotics? Or why am I someone that has put so much time and effort and money into this versus the average person? And it's not necessarily because I'm some survivalist and I hope the world goes to hell in a handbasket so I can live out my days in the woods. And I'm not that kind of guy. I like my life. I like a lot of modern comforts, but I'm like that because I've just researched how quickly societies can fall. I didn't go, okay, how do I become a prepper? It was actually through reading books like yours or other information and seeing how quickly society can actually fall and how we really are living on a knife's edge that holds the balance of our world in order. And right now there's so many different competing parties trying everything to knock our world off that knife's edge into chaos. And so that's it for me, is just first starting and learning, reading about what's happened before in communist China. Even the book you mentioned about the guy in Bosnia, I think it was Bosnia, right? When Bosnia collapsed. Yep. And reading books like that have shown me, it's like, oh, it's like, so someone might say, well, why do you need 200 Bic lighters? It's like, well, go read the book about the guy in Bosnia, where it's like, if you're someone that has a lighter, you're like a kingpin on your street. It's like, it just helps make sense.
It gets back to the little things, right? Yeah,
it does.
So you use the term normal, right? Preppers in today's modern society are considered weird. What's wrong with you? Just go down to Walmart and buy food when you need it. And so I would make the case for 6,000 years of modern human history, every society, everywhere, all towns, all people were preppers in the sense of they all had food to get them through the winter. They knew how to root cellar. They knew what kind of plants they could eat in the forest. They knew that you had to boil water before you drink it or you're going to potentially die. They had life skills that we don't dream about, and they always thought forward. They always thought ahead. Today, with just-in-time delivery system, again, it's 100% reliant on electric grid from the grocery store where you buy the food. The computer, when you buy it, sends a signal to the distribution facility. This facility sends more stuff, and then the signal goes from the distribution center to the canning facility, from the canning facility to the farm in Mexico. All these, there's just trillions of signals flying around the world, at any given point in time that keep this society sane and normal, that keep us fed. You take away those signals, those electronic signals, and that's where the future warfare is going to be fought in the electromagnetic spectrum with cyber attacks and EMPs, things of this nature. You take that away, everything stops where it is, and nobody has life skills from 100 years ago. So, like, the idea of having enough food in your house for even a couple months is like insane to people. But I would make the conjecture that you're the one that's insane, because you're putting your faith and trust in the United States government. Oh, they're taking care of this, and this will never happen. I got news for you. Well, we've been working in this industry trying to convince the American government to harden the electric grid for 20 years, and they're not doing it. They're just not doing it. We can get into the reasons why on another podcast, and all the intricacies and all the fights and all the bills that we've had defeated by the electric utility industry. But we're not. They're kicking the can, and it's not political. It's 5 administrations in a row now that have failed to take the safety and security of the American populace, and it wouldn't even be that expensive. It'd be less than what we pay Pakistan each year. But they're just not doing it. They're not hardening our grid. They're not making our grid safe from these types of events. And it's just so frustrating because it's so obvious to the military leaders, to those in government. It's so obvious that this is what's coming for this country, and no one's talking about it, and no one's doing anything about it. So I don't know. It's time to buy beans and bullets, people, if you're getting nothing else from this conversation. Take this stuff seriously. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Seth's word for it. Go and read some of these books. Read the 2004, 2008, 2017 EMP Commission reports on this, bipartisan reports to Congress on this threat. I mean, they told Congress in 2004, if we lose the civilian electric grid, which is highly likely in World War III. If we lose the civilian electric grid, 90% of the American population will die within the first year. Disease, societal arrests, violence. And, so, I mean, we still talk about 9/11. We still talk about Pearl Harbor. You're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 Americans dying, which are terrible, horrific tragedies. We're not going to be counting our dead in the thousands or 10,000 or even hundreds of thousands. We'll be counting them in the millions, the tens of millions, probably the hundreds of millions of Americans dying from an event like this. And everyone's putting their head in the sand and just kicking the can down the road. Say, oh, we'll deal with it later. We're going to study this problem some more. At the EMP task force that I'm a part of, and the Secure the Grid Coalition and Resilient Societies under Tom Popick, these are all places we have solutions to harden the grid. We have, we can provide solutions for states where we're working with, the states. Some of the states are seeing that the federal government's not doing. So we're making some headway in certain states. But as for American people, so let me, if you would, Seth, let me throw out one more plug. Everybody that's listening to this, I highly recommend. There's a newer documentary out called Grid Down Power Up. It's griddownpowerup.com, and that's by David Tice, and it's narrated by oh man, I'm just having a brain malfunction. Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid's the narrator, and I highly, highly recommend. It's a 1-hour documentary. Check that out. David Tice, the director, doing a great work. In fact, I'm going to be in DC with him and Dennis Quaid here on Tuesday. There's a new trailer out on YouTube for this. It's a 7-minute trailer. You can go and check that out. But this is a really good documentary to share with your friends to show the insanity of what not protecting the grid looks like, right? And the reasons why it hasn't been protected, and the fact that we do have solutions to do it. It's just not being done. So I'd highly recommend everybody check out that documentary that just came out here recently. I think it's coming out on Amazon and YouTube here in the coming months. But for now, you can check it out online there.
Perfect. And you mentioned 1 second after, which I'll pull that up again, and that was. It's a whole series similar to your series. This was by William Forstchen. This was also a pivotal book for me. I've actually listened to or read or listened to this series multiple times, and for me I put it on audiobook while I was out on my tractor. So I'm out there digging or building garden beds, and I've got this on listening to it. But great book, and this like some of these other books, this right here will turn you into a prepper, not in a bad way, just because it makes you aware of just how vulnerable things are. And so, getting into more practical things, and from let's just say that there's someone that's watching this and they live in suburbia America. Say they're on a quarter acre in a 1980s bi-level, and they're concerned, and they've done nothing to prepare. Right, they're just now starting into this. Aside from, I'd say, starting off with like downloading that free PDF on your website and just reading more about that. If someone came to you and say you only had 5 minutes to talk to them, and you're trying to just give them some quick, some quick pointers that you think could really help save them in the future, whether it's food supply, whatever it is. What's that that 5 minute spiel look like to somebody that has done nothing to prepare?
That is really a difficult thing because it flies in the face of what everybody wants to hear. So there's a lot of prepper channels online that'll tickle people's ears, right? And they'll say, "Oh, you live in some suburban area of Atlanta, like you mentioned, on a quarter acre and a cul-de-sac, and here's a 10-step program to prepare for the apocalypse, right? Do this. Put a garden in your backyard, put a 6-foot privacy fence so no one will know you're gardening in your neighborhood, and do this and throw trash out front so it looks like the place is a bit." They're going to give you all these kind of easy things for you to latch onto, and then you're going to feel really confident that you're safe and protected because you follow this 10-step program. And what I will tell you out of the gate is that if you are on no budget, or a very tight budget, you're the average American in this country, let me be honest with you. If a long-term grid down event happens in this country, it's going to be very difficult for you to make it through. And the solution is not staying in your suburban neighborhood, your row house downtown, and writing things out and seeing things, how things are going to go. Read the first chapter of Seko Begovich's book where he's like, if I could go back and do anything different, I would have got out immediately out of the city while I still could. But he was like, I was young and I was dumb and I just wanted to, it's history and I wanted to stay here. And, 2 chapters later, he's eating, maggoty sandwich that he finds in a refrigerator, right? And, they're drinking water out of rain barrels and everyone has diarrhea. So education is so important. Understanding what's coming to build your plan of action. I say it over and over and over again, because that's the thing that most of these guys online get wrong. The second thing is they don't understand the long-term ramifications or even the threats of an EMP scenario. Again, I'm in this industry. I see the reports. We're discussing this constantly. This is not some tinfoil hat thing that you put it up there on the shelf to consider down the road. This is something that is coming for this country. It will happen in our lifetime. I firmly believe that. So a lot of people that the word prepper, the word preparedness covers such a large gambit of people. There's people in Florida that are preparing for hurricanes. That's just if you live in Florida, you're going to be hit by a hurricane at some point. You should have a case of water and some MREs in your basement. That's just common sense. That's not really what I kind of focus on, the longer term events. So separating who am I listening to and what's their perspective? If they're just giving you short-term advice, almost all that short-term advice is going to tell you to stay put, stay in your safety zone, your house, and do everything in your home and prepare everything right there. And that's great. And I don't disagree with that advice for talking about a 1 week or a 2 week event, a snowstorm or a power outage or something like that. Great. But if we're talking a long-term event that collapses society, if you get nothing else, your chance of surviving a long-term event in a suburban neighborhood of a big city, or even in a small town with 5 or 10,000 people, that's 5 or 10,000 starving, desperate madmen. I'm going to be blunt. A month or two into this event, you're outnumbered 5,000 to 1. You're the only guy in the town with a generator with enough power to, you're the only one with lights on. You're the only one not getting skinny. People are going to figure this out really fast. The idea that just because you bought this 1-year food plan from Wise and you have it in your basement, you paid for it, so it's yours and you get to keep it. That's just not going to work when society and the rules of engagement basically change. And that's why I talk about normalcy bias. A lot of people make their plans into the future with the idea of, in the back of their mind, people are gonna still talk normal. We're still gonna have normal conversations. We're gonna make handshake agreements with the neighbor, and they're gonna do this and we're gonna do that. If something happens, we'll call 911. Well, none of that stuff's gonna function. None of those things. It's gonna go back to the lowest common denominator, essentially, where the guy with the biggest stick or the biggest gun and the most know-how and the one willing to check his soul at the gate, that's willing to do horrific things, is going to be the one that's eating your food, essentially, right? So I strongly advise people, you have to have a plan to get out of mass population centers, period. If that means Uncle Bob's farm, if that means a bed and breakfast that you visited 4 or 5 times, it's off the beaten path. So I lay out 5 different strategies. I mentioned earlier, my survival theory is kind of my way of paying back to the average Joe, right? That can't afford these large survival retreats. Survival theory 2, I lay out 5 strategies for people on very little to no budget, on a better scenario than sticking in your house and just watching it all fall apart around your ears. Because at some point, you may have an AR-15 and you may think you're John Rambo, but at some point a bigger group's going to come along, and at some point you have to sleep sometime, right? You're not going to win long term. You may win the short term battles, but the long term fight, especially if you have food, especially if you have supplies, you got a generator, you got solar panels on your roof, and you're one of the few people in your neighborhood with power, it's going to go very poorly for you. Let me put it that way. So having a fallback location to go to, even if you don't own it. So I lay out 5 strategies. They're not wonderful. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, these are golden tickets. They're going to be uncomfortable, and they're not going to be the best case scenario. But I would take one of those 5 strategies long before I would just hang out in town and just see how bad it's going to get. So what I tell people to actually answer your question, the 2 big things you have to understand, your major, unless you live in Southern Arizona, you can procure water, right? You in an off-grid event or in a serious pandemic event where you got to be away from people. You can procure water. You can procure shelter in the sense of you can have a roof over your head. You can have weapons for personal protection. Your biggest thing is food. The average person eats 2,000 pounds, a metric ton of food a year. So I've actually worked with a couple mayors of small towns. After the book 1 Second After came out, I had a couple mayors reach out to me and say, hey, we want to do something and prepare for this beforehand, right? And one of them was in Utah. I'm not going to name the name of the town, but it was only like 500 people. It was a small town. There was a ranching town. They had grain bins around. They had cattle around. We crunched the numbers. We looked at the town. I looked at it with the mayor, and it was just no way to keep, we're talking 2,000 pounds of food a year. That town needed 1.5 metric tons of calories basically delivered to that town every day until they could get their farming and their agriculture and start growing their own food, which was a huge issue as well. It just wasn't feasible. The people were going to start starving long before that first harvest season came. And once people starve and start going nuts, you can't maintain order. So that was a big thing. Another big eye-opening. I did that with 2 towns, and we just discovered it's just not feasible to keep people fed. So you have to understand, lack of food, starvation, it's going to be a major factor. That's going to be the big issue, is not having food. And once people, average Joes, not even so much them, but once their 7-year-old kid starts to starve to death, there's nothing they're not going to do to procure food for that child. It's just human nature. It's survival. It's just, we're going to go back to kind of caveman days, essentially. And the American people think we've evolved past that. And it's just, we're not going to get back there, but we can very easily. So lack of food. And then your biggest threat is people. And that's what nobody wants to understand. They want to have this, well, I'm going to barter and I'm going to trade with this guy or trade with that guy. Man, if you trade with somebody and they give you their last chicken to just get some rice to feed their family, they're coming back, and they're probably coming back with a group. Every time you meet face to face with somebody, they're reading you. They're looking at how skinny you've gotten, how dirty you are. How haggard you look. Is your face gray or your cheeks sunken in? Everybody's scoping everybody out. So you're going to barter your way through this and trade this or trade that. you're kind of opening the door to, getting yourself ambushed in the very near future by a larger group. So my philosophy is humans are lack of food and other humans are the big threat. If you can get in a tucked away location during that large die off, we said for the first year, if you can keep your head down for the first year and live through that first year, your chances of long-term survival go through the roof, because, you need to, it sounds terrible to say, but you need to let that craziness kind of go past and then come up for air and look around you and see what other groups, and then you can start, pulling groups together, start kind of rebuilding society. But that first year, if you're just out in the open, if you're in the middle of town, or again, going to live off the national forest, I mean, that's a crazy, ridiculous idea too. I mean, I cover a lot of these different dynamics that people are telling other people to do. Again, it comes from a place, and then they're good-hearted. They're trying to help people, but they don't know what they don't know. They haven't been in any of the meetings that I've been in. They haven't been inside they just assume somebody's going to fix this thing at some point. It's just not going to happen. If you get nothing else from this, last thing I'll say, there is zero plan at FEMA to deal with a long-term grid down event. There is zero plan at the federal government to deal with a long-term event. There is zero plan at the United States military to deal with a long-term event. None of these organizations have even looked at a long-term grid down event. It's something beyond design basis. And again, they're kicking the can down the road. They're putting their head in the sand, pretending it's not going to happen, hoping, wishing and praying it's not going to happen. The leaders know it's a threat, but it's just, that's where we're at as a country. And, failure to imagine. This is the future of warfare, and very few people are talking about it.
And I'm glad that, you're speaking sober words. You're not just puffing it up for people. You're trying to give them a very real understanding. And now you're coming from the perspective of a grid down event. You're coming from the perspective of a really worst case scenario. But one thing that I gathered from your books, from One Second After others, is that if you can prepare for that worst case scenario, you're going to be pretty good in most other scenarios, whether it's a natural disaster that knocks the grid out for a month or whatever it is. You're going to be fine if you can prepare for that. So I will make sure I put all the links in the description for the show today. We talked about a lot of different things. I encourage people, I'll pull it up one more time. I encourage folks to go to your website, go to that research page, go to that grid down report, start there. Great place to get started. And thank you so much for what you're doing. And thank you for giving so much information. It's really important information. And hopefully we can do a show again, say mid-year, and the world's still kind of holding together, that we're not, we're not doing some remote broadcast from our bunker over ham radios together.
Yeah, hopefully, but I'm happy to come on anytime.
Great.
I appreciate being here, Seth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, man. Take care. Folks, as you know, my friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. And he didn't start just by simply creating the best pillow. He created the Giza Dream bed sheets. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. So Mike's Giza bed sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. Giza Dream sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors. Mike's latest incredible deal is the sale of the year. So folks, for a limited time, you'll receive 50% off the Giza Dream sheets. You'll receive a set for as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code MAN. That's MAN, as in Man in America. There you'll find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets and so much more. So call 800-985-8966. Again, it's 800-985-8966. Use the promo code MAN. Go to mypillow.com. Make sure you use promo code MAN.